It's only not tyranny when it's a jury trial. The establishment that wishes that none of these things were real has moved heaven and earth to debase the value of the juries. The day the blue envelope dropped on the step saying you're invited to come for your jab, I was frightened. Societal change has never been affected by majorities. It's stubborn, awkward squad people that affect change. You can't be both the constitutional monarch and give away the rights and freedoms of your people. It lasts until, and only until, people just say no.
Hello and welcome to Resistance GB, the Resistance podcast. Today I'm joined by Dan Astin-Gregory and Neil Oliver. Guys, do you want to tell us where we are?
Well, I'll start here. We're at the People's Reset United Kingdom. It's the first event of its kind here in the UK. And I partnered with Derek Brose, who's a long-standing activist and media creator who's been putting on these events since 2020 in the United States and Mexico, really in response to what was initially the Great Reset by the World Economic Forum, where they didn't just want to sit back and say, well, you're going to drive all the ideas, these unelected bureaucrats are going to determine the future of humanity. We're going to gather in the same way as you are, and we're going to explore our own ideas. And they've been doing it now since 2020 in the United States, in Mexico. And I had the opportunity to speak in Mexico in January this year. It feels like a lifetime ago. And by the second day, I knew we had to bring this to the United Kingdom. So and we actually announced it. It's a 5-day event in Mexico, and we announced it on the 5th day. No idea how we were going to make it happen, when, but here we are at the People's Reset United Kingdom. And we've called it our Summit for the Future because Derek and I were just at the United Nations, where they passed the Pact of the Future at their Summit for the Future. And again, we wanted to create an antithesis to that. And again, give people an alternative so we can create a real competition of ideas. So we're here on the second day of the People's Reset. I'm delighted Neil's been here. He's just finished his set, if you will. And it's been a truly inspirational day. And I was just remarking to Neil how it was fascinating to see how Neil kind of distilled some of the ideas of today's sessions through his own experiences.
Well, because I'm the first to admit, as I admitted on stage, I don't. People say to me all the time, right, you've laid out the problem, what's the answer? Yeah. And I honestly don't know. I'm aware of people who do have ideas, and I'm open to them. I believe, I suppose other things I could have said today and we just didn't have time for, I think there's a turning away that's required. You know that thing in The Horse Whisperer, where the idea is a horse doesn't like being ignored. So if you want to get its attention, you turn away from it. Don't go towards it, turn away. And it doesn't want to be excluded from the herd because it's a herd animal. And so it will now seek your company. And I think a simple turning away from all of the captured institutions, all of the captured entities, education, whatever, supply chain, all of it, if possible, and if people build alternatives. Now, it's at that point that I find it difficult because I don't know how to build an alternative education system. I'm not a smallholder that can grow enough food to feed a family. I don't really know how to operate without a bank account. But I know a man who does. And so that's why I came here, because I'm interested to hear what solution-minded people have to say.
It reminds me of the old adage that if you want to stand out from the crowd, walk away from it.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden they turn and look at you. And
people, I think we are, I suppose as a species, we are pack animals. We live communally, and most people want to be with people. You get loners, but most people want to be around people. And people are prepared to go to great lengths to remain on the inside. They will put up with a lot. There's this idea about betrayal blindness, where it's like an abusive relationship, where people are in an abusive relationship because they have so much invested in the relationship. Maybe they've been together for years, got family together, a house together, and all of the rest of it. They'll do anything to avoid confronting the reality of the situation, such that when friends and family approach them quietly and say, you are in an abusive relationship and you really need to get out of it, that victimised person will turn their anger on the person trying to get them out of it, which is analogous to the situation many of us have found ourselves in, being told to shut up because people don't want to hear it. And the last person that the victim in that situation will turn their anger on is the abusive partner, which in this context is the government or the state or however you conceive of, the powers that ought not to be. And so, I think that is the problem, that for many people who just want to get on with their lives, they don't want to be excluded, they don't want to lose their job, they don't want to lose their friendships and all of the rest of it. And so even although they're in an iniquitous situation now, their freedoms are being eroded, they're being badly treated by the institutions that are supposed to have their best interests at heart, but those people a mass of the population are still ready to turn a blind eye to all of that because they just want to be on the inside.
Yeah, people get comfortable in the discomfort, and you can apply that to anything, whether it's a job. People stay in jobs or careers that they hate. They stay in relationships in the way that you've described, and it isn't until they reach a point of what I call leverage. And we've all got different tolerance zones, but once we hit that point of leverage, whether it's in a career or a relationship, when we say enough is enough, and the pain gets so much, until we reach that point, we won't make a change. And that range is different for everyone in different scenarios. So for some people during COVID, for instance, it was almost instant. There was you've overstepped the boundary, I'm out. For others, it took a long time to reach that point of leverage, and some have still not reached that point.
People say there's this endless conversation that goes on, about what is it you think that's the common denominator amongst all of the people that whatever didn't take the vaccination or whatever. And it's the $64,000 question, because the people are of all ages, all sexes, all creeds, all colours, all countries. There's just a proportion came out and said, I'm not doing that. And it's hard to define what it is that's the unifying characteristic. I wonder if there even is a unifying characteristic. Perhaps there is, but I just know that for me, I was self-employed. And I've had a couple of jobs way back in my, immediately after leaving university, I had a couple of jobs, but I've mostly been self-employed. And once you're self-employed, it's simultaneously scary at a low level because you're always looking for the next gig. You're not quite sure how you're going to keep paying the bills. But you are liberated because you're not being told what to do. You don't have a boss, not in that same straightforward transaction that you do have when you're a PAYE employee. And I think that meant that together with my wife, when we thought there was something wrong here, we were independent anyway. I wasn't going to lose I lost all my income streams, but I didn't lose my job. I continued to be me because I was just self-employed Neil Oliver. And that couldn't be taken from me. I couldn't be sacked from being me. Yes. I wasn't earning any money being me for some period of time until I rejigged things and found out other ways to pay the mortgage. But I wasn't in that relationship where somebody had the power over me.
Well, then it even begs the question, what leads to someone embracing that path of independence? Because again, a lot of people, and I was included in that, I spent 8 years in corporate, and it was the very idea of leaving that comfort zone.
That's a big thought.
It's big. But again, I reached that point of leverage, and I said, enough's enough. It was my 29th birthday, and I said, no way. I'm not going into another decade in a job that dissatisfies me. And it was a point in my history that I made a defining decision. But if people haven't met that point of decision in their lives before, then perhaps, they haven't got the kind of grounding that's needed to be uncomfortable in these times.
Yeah, there's something very true about, there is a line that's something like, it's very hard to dissuade a person of something that their salary depends on them believing it. So it's like with the doctors, I think. The doctors, throughout history, doctors have often ended up complicit in all sorts of terrible regimes and all of the rest of it. Because, they are almost the epitome of a profession where they're very highly educated, but they've had to put up with a lot to get there. They have to accept being told what to do by their seniors, and they also end up in a position where they're encouraged to at least believe that they've got life and death power over everybody else. And so therefore everything they're doing and everything the medical profession is doing must be right. It's easy for them to adopt that mindset. No, we must be right. We're the doctors. We are the medical profession. But de facto, the things we say and do must be right. And it was only a handful of them, that doctors, nurses, all sorts of, a minority again, that said, do you know what, this is bonkers. This is not right what we're doing. But all these clever people, credentialed, highly qualified people said, no, save millions of lives, this is the thing to do. They were able to persuade themselves of it because it's bound into their psyche.
I interviewed a lot of doctors and scientists at the early stage, and I know you've done some as well. It was the independence again. Their salary didn't depend on the system. So they're the kind of lonely first movers, really, who had the courage to do something. But again, they didn't have that dependency. Is that something you experienced as well?
Yeah, we found a lot of people, it felt completely isolated, but they tended to be people who were sort of the free thinkers, the people on the periphery. Like you look at Vernon Coleman, right? These are people who are always on the outside and they sort of lead in other people. But what I wonder is how much of it is down to the education system? How much of it is down to being in a room with 30 other kids and the only way they can really maintain control is having cast iron discipline in that classroom rather than having the smaller, more natural class sizes that you would have being homeschooled? Because as you know, I work homeschooling kids with Hope and we have smaller groups. We have about 10, 12 kids maximum. That's the maximum, because beyond that, we feel that we don't actually have enough time with each individual child to teach them.
Again, though, in pursuit of that perfect answer to the question, what is the unifying characteristic of all of the people that said no? I was state educated, classes with 35, 36 kids in them at times. I received a perfectly, looking back, I think it was perfectly good education, but it was just a bog standard state school education from start to finish. And lots of people that came out of that exactly the same education went along with the hoax, and then you'll also get, I'm sure, in that homeschool environment, you probably get people who are homeschooled in your environment. Maybe 2 or 3 of them would say no, but some of them would go, yeah, okay, it is education,
yeah,
but it's not just it. It's not only, but also it's not just that. That would be a factor.
Yes.
But you're not going to get to it's not going to be that, the only critical thinkers are those that come out of a homeschool environment. Maybe proportionately more will, but I don't even know if I'm a critical thinker. I mean, critical thinkers it's a buzz phrase, isn't it? Critical thinkers. And I think I've never really bothered to question whether I am a critical thinker. For me, not taking the jab was just a reptilian bit of a lizard bit of my brain. Just for the first time in my life, I thought, I'm in danger here. And I thought it was physiological. I felt it. I mean, the day the blue envelope dropped on the step saying you're invited to come for your jab, I was frightened.
Was that when you woke up?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I began to wake up really because lockdown shut down all my revenue streams. I mean, primarily, I had been doing a theatre tour. I was going around theatres doing a 2-hour one-man show type thing. And that was how I was earning money at that time. I've earned money I've made television, I write books, I've prioritised different things at different times. But at that time, my priority with these theatre shows, all the theatres shut. I was like, what are we going to do? All the theatres were locked down. A lot of them didn't even have never reopened. I thought, and my wife was looking at me across the breakfast table going, right, okay, because we've done that many times over the years. What will we do? How will we get ourselves out of that? That's when I woke up, because I thought, this is presenting a genuine economic challenge here. How am I? All the things I do to make money are dependent on being out there. So that was when I started looking around and thinking, this can't go on. I need out of this situation. I'm going to lose my house.
So it was the personal interest that drew you in?
Absolutely.
I think that's a key commonality. Until it comes back to that point of leverage, until you feel it, I used to say, feeling in your backyard, until it becomes personal.
It was personal at that point, but it was the advent of the jabs that my wife and I both looked at it and thought, that's hinky. There's something wrong with that. But we both knew that it takes 10 years to bring forward a cream for psoriasis, far less. Where the hell have they got this that they can just suddenly give this to 8 billion people? What is that? What is it? And I was a little bit frightened. Don't like that. So it triggered a flight or fight amygdala response in me for the first time in my life. And because I had this physiological response to the situation for the very first time, I thought, I'm bloody well listening to that. That I've clicked on, an old alarm system that's just been lying dormant. And if the siren's on and the light's flashing for the first time, I better pay attention to it. And really, it was at that moment I started thinking, there's something malign here. So that was when I woke up. Yeah.
And so do you think it's people who have been through some sort of hardship, through some sort of thing that triggers a triggering event
I
that
don't think
wakes
it
people
needs
up?
necessarily be hardship, but I just think that it has to personally impact you in a way. But also, I think, as I was thinking about the commonalities, I think about the human values. So I know that one of my top values is freedom. My definition of what freedom means now has changed. My pursuit of freedom in my 30s was freeing myself from the corporate system. I wanted to have independence in my career. I wanted to be able to make choices that would enable me to live the kind of life that I wanted to live, attract the kind of partner I wanted to be with. But COVID showed me the kind of external freedom, the freedom from oppressive systems and freedom from governments. It was the first time I really felt threatened by the government because and I've never been one that likes to be told what to do, particularly when it's in a completely impolite way, like just shutting the country down. And I, likewise with Neil, I also felt that at one point, it got to the point where I thought that we were going to see people knocking on the door saying you need to come and get injected. And I was not willing. I mean, the kind of scenarios I was playing in my head, how I'd handle that, because I was firmly resolute that that was not happening.
My worst bit, and it sounds really shallow in a way, really. I mean, compared to what other people went through, people that lost what they lost and all of the rest of it. But I had to go up and down to my job in GB News on the plane. Early, I mean, this GB News started in June 21. And I was unvaccinated and I wasn't wearing a mask, face covering. And so I was having to, walk through Terminal 5 at Heathrow on a Sunday morning with everyone masked, get onto the plane, the crew would be masked, and they would, without exception, say, "You're not wearing a mask, sir." And I would say, "No, I'm not." And usually they would say, "Are you exempt?" And I would just say, "Yes, I am." Because in my head, as a free human being, I was exempt from this nonsense.
Of course.
So I wasn't telling a lie.
Yes.
But then the worst of it was I then turned down into the body of the plane and there'd be like 299 people with masks on and me. And I had to walk down, find my seat. It was usually a middle seat, like 21E. Get in. People would ring the bell and the steward would come down and they would say, "I want to move. I'm not sitting next to him." And then they'd say, "Oh, it's a fully booked flight, sir," or whatever. And they would have to sit. So for the hour and 10 minutes, I'd sit there like that. And it was a real sense of threat. Yeah. There was a real sense. And it was in that piece. And I do not mean to trivialise by saying this, but it started a line of thinking in my head where I thought all those years where I wondered how they got things to happen in Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, all the telling on the neighbours and turning a blind eye while folk got their doors kicked in and thrown at the back of a van in the middle of the night. I used to think, how did they get? Surely people wouldn't behave like that. But my own personal experience of the reception I was getting coming onto a plane as though I was Typhoid Mary, I thought, it's only going to take a couple of people to say, "Get him off the plane," and I'm going to end up getting frog marched off of this plane by an angry mob. But I thought, that's how it can be done, because people will turn against the person that's bucked the trend.
Oh, they will. Yeah, so let me throw a couple of things. And by the way, I remember going to a shop during this period and literally I walked to the counter and I wasn't wearing a mask. And then the shop attendant and the other customer suddenly panicked. And I was looking behind me like, what is it? Oh,
is there a gunman?
It's me. So they were like, "Oh, you can be served next." So I was like, "Okay, priority queue, I like this." But it was crazy. But on the airplane piece, so you and I were talking when I spoke on your show this week about kind of my early stages into what was happening just as we were exploring here. And I shared that we were boarding a flight to Thailand for my our honeymoon. And I was geeking out on what was going on. And I read this document. It was about 198 pages long. You can't find it now, by the way, but it was written by the Aviation Authority, which dismissed the rationale for wearing a face covering or mask on an airplane. It basically used the kind of aerodynamics to explain or invalidate the requirement. Apart from maybe there was some sort of obscure rationale that one seat on the plane where the tail kind of, when you meet to the tail of the plane and the aerodynamics slightly shift, that there was a slightly higher risk in those seats.
Of what? Of
contracting a virus in an airplane environment. So they were looking at it through influenza. But it said, this massive document said that there was no rationale for, but of course now that's long deleted because that became a mandate. But it struck me, even at that point, people were voluntarily wearing masks. This is February 2020, pre-lockdowns. But there's a really fascinating book called Influence by a gentleman called Robert Cialdini. And he breaks down 7 principles about why people do what they do and how people are influenced. And one of the principles he talks about, and I don't know the specific psychological term for it, I can't recall it, but it's basically incremental steps towards something bigger. So if someone's willing to take a small step, and they gave an example of political campaigning. So if you're willing to display a flyer in the window of your car or a sticker or a badge, you're more likely then, if asked, to put a political, in America you see these big flags. So if you ask them to take a small act, they're statistically more likely, psychologically, to follow through with a bigger act. So if you think about it, it started with wash your hands for 20 seconds. I've never felt more like a child in my life to be told to wash my hands for 20 seconds and have it written down in 16 steps how to wash my hands. But if you think about it, that was the first thing they asked us to do, wash our hands. Very simple step. I wash my hands anyway. I go to the bathroom, So it starts with something small, and you can comply with that. I'm already doing it. The next thing comes along, it's just a mask. And this is why you see all those memes. It's just this, it's just that. But if you can see from a psychological point of view, ever so slowly escalating to the point when they come for the big thing, will you vote for this guy?
Yeah.
Will you take this injection?
I've said it before and I'll say it again. My wife and I were initially frightened when we saw the footage coming out of China and Italy really. I don't think I saw the people face planting in Beijing until later. But I saw the stuff coming out of the Italian hospitals of panic and what it seemed like apparent overcrowding and whatever. And, it was effective propaganda. And Trudy and I were looking at, because our kids were younger then, obviously 4 years younger than they were all at school. And we were looking at each other thinking, because we trusted the establishment. We'd never had any cause particularly to think that the government would do something bad to us. And we were talking to each other going, right, okay, what is it? Don't know. Seems to be a new disease. And they were making it sound like, Ebola. They were making it sound like they were talking about, what's his name now? Neil Ferguson said 500,000 dead if we don't lock down. You go, Jesus, what is this? And we were frightened for about a fortnight. The lockdown happened, you must return to your homes. It's like being in a disaster movie. But that's as long as it lasted. It was like after that point, we're going, I'm going to have to earn some money here. Whatever's going on, I'm going to have to go out and get a job and, bring home some bacon and all of the rest of it. And it was at that point. But genuinely, the propaganda got me.
Well, people fear the unknown. But that Italy story is interesting because also when I look back now, and one of the blessings of AI and recognition tools is that you can now find the original source of certain videos. So you can see that some of the videos that they were playing during that part from Italy, from the hospitals, were actually not from Italy. They were from France in 2017 with another overcrowding crisis. So that's the most twisted part. They would use false imagery to reinforce
all the coffins that were piled, and they were from a separate tragedy some years previous. I can't remember the details of it. Something out of Bosnia or whatever.
There's a crematorium in New York that's notorious for having backlogs of burials or crematoriums. So they were using all of this to manipulate. And we made a small documentary in September 2020 where this is before the jabs had even come out, but they'd written how they were going to market this to the public. And it was shocking. I spent a decade prior to that working in business and marketing. So it was fascinating because I was like, wow, this is really deep and dark. It's using fear because fear's a seller. Fear will make you buy things.
Yeah, we fell for it for a fortnight.
But the biggest one was make people fear each other, and that for me, all these phrases. Think about it. No one is safe until we're all safe, and that there was a billboard from the government that said, treat other people like they have the virus.
Yeah.
Imagine that. We lived during a culture where people were told to behave as though the perfectly healthy person in front of you was sick. And then you look at the numbers, and statistically, at any given time, in any given city, there's a very small number of people that were actually sick, yet they were all staying in their homes, their entire street, their neighbors were completely healthy people. And even if they weren't healthy, we were creating a condition whereby we were fearing each other through an invisible threat.
I mean, to take this in a slightly different direction, no matter how often I say things like this, I'm very frustrated by the purity test that's out there.
Oh, yeah.
Where you say something and someone says, oh, you're saying that now. You didn't say that a year ago. Yeah. That whole game.
Oh, it's terrible.
And because, and no matter how often I say, I bought it, and then I didn't buy it. And people like, like Dr. John Campbell, who I've spoken to, I can't tell you how many conversations John and I have had now, online and offline. And he did the whole thing. His journey was so honest. He started
saw
out
every step along the way.
He started out saying,
documented,
get the vaccine, pro-vax, all the rest of it. And then he went, oh my God. Well, he didn't use those words because he doesn't use profanity.
No.
But he did a John Campbell version of a mea culpa and said, and now he's as anti, he wants those products taken off the market and all of the rest of it. But there's a whole section of people out there that go, you are damned for it, cast out into outer darkness because for a time you believed it. And you go, well, but he doesn't believe it now, and he's fessed up to the fact that he got it wrong. What more do you want the guy to do? Are you still going to burn him at the stake for having got it wrong?
I think that's too much, but I think that's why we need to be cautious about our fundamental rights. Like you talked on the stage about the meaning of inalienable or unalienable, the fact that we have certain rights that can't be taken away. And the government always use this sort of excuse of emergency. Well, because of this situation, I just think if there were actually a Black Death, how many people would actually leave their home of their own accord?
Yeah, exactly.
Would you? If you knew...
There were bodies in the street outside, uncollected, with birds pecking at them, you'd probably remain indoors. People respond sensibly to real threat. Absolutely, they would do that.
Yeah, and accurate information. We're obviously having a catharsis here because we've just had an entire 2 days worth of a summit where we said we won't mention the C word, and we've just spent the last, it's the catalyst for a lot of what we're doing here.
But it's almost inevitable that people will keep raking over these calls because there hasn't been any kind of reckoning or accounting or consequences.
Absolutely.
The same people that did it all are in better jobs now.
Yes, they are.
And even though they come out and say, yeah, we made that bit up. Yeah, we just said that to frighten people. Consequences come there none. And so it's that abscess, that impacted wisdom tooth has not been addressed. It's there for a lot of people people were destroyed by it. And we know who did who caused the destruction. And they're still there. Yeah. And of course people are going to keep raking over it because it's a live wire. And anytime anyone touches it, they go,
Yes, well, I agree with you. And Derek, who's the original founder of this event, I admire him for his tenacity in detaching from that to some degree, whereas I'm the same. The injustice of it.
I mean, I have moved on from it. Every time if the topic comes up with like-minded people, I'm more than happy to, roll around and wallow in it. Absolutely, as we are doing. But I mean, quite frankly, I have moved on from it because what the C word taught me was then when the Ukraine came along, I thought, oh right, the same playbooks in use here. And then it made me think about, and the ramping up of climate crisis and Israel-Gaza and everything. And everything. I've got COVID, problems. That's an unexorcised ghost, absolutely. But it's Antigone, isn't it? It's like future cares have future cures. Attend the present need. That was written 2,500 years ago, and it's absolutely right. So you've got to go with what's happening right now. Yes, what happened there and what happens in the future also problems, but the emergent situation that we're confronted with right now counts more than COVID. It's just that COVID was supposed to teach us they're a bunch of lying bastards.
Yes.
Isn't it just a head of a hydra, though? And if you don't actually deal with the root cause, which is the corruption, which is the fact they don't believe we have fundamental rights, that they'll just get away with it. They'll do it all over again. It's rinse, repeat. There's a band, Raw Milk Conspiracy, they've got a song called The New Thing. They've got the climate on there, drag queen story hour. Right? There's always a new thing. There's always a new thing that they'll come up with.
It lasts until, and only until, people just say no. They don't have any power. This is well rehearsed. We've all said variations on it. If there's a cabal of 10,000 people or something, or 8,000 people, that's one for every million of us. They don't have any power. I mean, if they roll out their nonsense about 15-minute cities or CBDCs or digital IDs, if the people just say no, what are they going to do? They've got nothing.
Only if a sizable amount of the population says no, because you can have the 1%, and what they can do, let's say, even if 90% of people just stop paying tax, they take the taxes from the other 10%, they'd hire as many police as they could, and they use them to go and bully people one by one by one. Look at how they enforce the lockdowns. They enforce it via the businesses. Okay? People didn't go out to defend the businesses when it was the businesses that had to enforce it because...
You're completely right. I agree. That is how that was achieved. But I do think that a meaningful number of people are different now than they were then. And I'd really love to know what the real percentages are between the lost people and the found people. Because I think the found people are now too many to handle. They're not the majority, and they never will be. But societal change has never been affected by majorities. It's stubborn, awkward squad people that affect change. Sometimes it's just Gandhi. Sometimes it's just Jesus that changed society. And I think, but way beyond that, there are now literally millions of people in Britain that when they roll out, monkey, Ebola, anthrax, pox, are just going to go, no, not taking it. I'm not frightened, and I'm not taking the jab.
Well, to take you on that point, so your closing statement today was about part of the solution is you just being here, which is right. And this is not just about you as an individual, but actually the old phrase, politics is downstream from culture. So what we're witnessing now in politically is a function of everything that's preceded it. But this turning point now has created a counterculture of sorts. There are now many of us in the world, millions of us in the world, who have been through this experience, and we will never see the world in the same way again. And already we're seeing people from that community, people here that we're seeing at the event, who are now doing things differently. So it will take time to permeate, but there is a shift. And I think, as I was listening to you earlier, I was thinking I'd love to really understand Neil's historical perspective on these cycles, because they are cycles. And it seems that we hit the edges and then bounce back, and maybe there's a evolution to it somewhat, that it's not going in a complete circle. Maybe there's a spiral to it.
Well, somebody, one of the speakers this afternoon said it. Was it David, or was it Derek? Oh no, it must have been Sam talking about crypto. These fiat currencies have to die, but it's in their DNA.
Yes.
They will fail, because they inflate them to the point where, we've been saying that since 1971 or something, the pound in your pocket is 98% gone, whatever. And eventually it'll be 100% gone because of the way they drive fiat currencies till they do their thing, and then it must die. So these things they're always cyclical, and they must always fail. I think the government is so ridiculous now, and I'm talking specifically about Britain, but I'm sure Americans would say the same about Kamala and so on. But here in Britain, with Keir Starmer and his cronies, it's so ridiculous and it's so exposed that the mass of the population are basically treating the government like the nutter on the night bus that gets on and everyone can see him, and they're just praying that he doesn't sit down next to them.
Starmageddon.
They can see him, they think he's a nut, they're a bit worried about what he might do, but it's a bus full of people, and really they're just going to get off at the next stop to get away from him.
Yes.
No one is looking at the government of Keir Starmer and taking it seriously as authority. We're looking on at something bonkers.
Yeah, but it's much easier to get off a bus than it is to step out of a government
I know, I am
regime.
speaking hypothetically. I'm just saying that
I think that's what it's
hypothetically,
saying.
if enough people... Will Keat I talk to quite a lot. He's who has re-educated me about the Constitution and trial by jury and all of the rest of it. A fantastic person to listen to. And he talks about the danger of nice, that people inculcate a notion that it's better to be nice. Whatever's just be nice. Just diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just go on. Men can be women. Yeah. I don't really think it, but just be nice, because it's easy to be nice, but it's almost wicked to be nice in those circumstances. That the really difficult thing to do is to say no, to not be nice, and that takes a lot of doing in the face of the herd. To stand up and go, I'm not doing that because it's wrong. I'm not going to be nice. I'm not going to be nice about it. It's wrong. It's very, very difficult. But it is the person that stands up and says no.
Yes.
That can affect societal change. Because a lot of people go, God, I'm glad you said that, because I think it's a lot of bollocks as well. And it can then have that effect. But it's the power of no.
Do you think this is why it's important that people learn about our Constitution?
Absolutely. I mean, I just didn't. I knew about, because of studying history and reading history and so on and so on. I knew about Magna Carta, and I knew about the Declaration of Independence, and I knew about the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights and the amendments and so on and so on. I simply hadn't. they were on the other side of, bulletproof glass. They seemed out. They weren't anything to do with me. I was never going to touch them. But the experience of watching my rights eroded has taken away that, and now I've looked at them as though for the first time. And like I was saying on stage today about unalienable rights. I found that I'd never thought about that properly before. That even if you want to be a slave, in terms of unalienable rights, you can't. It's not your option. You can't go like that, even if you want to, because your rights cannot be surrendered. Now you've got a problem, because now you've got somebody that's saying, "I've come to enslave you," and you might want to say, "Okay, clap on the irons, take me to the field." You can't. Now it's a problem, because you might have to fight to the death here, because that's how inalienable rights are taken from you, with life itself. Now you've got a problem.
Are you worried about the fact so few people, we were talking about this earlier just as before we were starting, are you worried so few people know that they've completely debased the concept of juries? For example,
yes,
you can have people who aren't even British citizens serving on juries. You can have verdicts that are not
Magistrates'
unanimous.
Magistrates' courts, that's a corruption.
Magistrates' courts can put people in prison for up to 6 months, which is what they've been doing with Tommy Robinson, obviously. So you could be put in prison, you could have your entire life taken away from you, Dan, and never see a jury. They could literally rip everything away, and you never get to be put in front of your peers.
It's a travesty of justice, literally.
And even if they have a trial and they find you not guilty, they've got rid of the idea of double jeopardy, and they can just try you again until they get the answer that they want.
In a situation where there is a jury trial, or has been a jury trial, it's happened historically, where the jury has the temerity, because the judge has no power in the original jury system. He's more like a referee. He's there so that the jurors can ask for clarification on points of legislation. So he's like, if you're playing Monopoly, it's like you've got somebody that's sitting there with a book of rules, and he goes, "Oh yeah, in this instance, this." He's got no power. He's not supposed to have power. He's like an administrator in this situation properly. But where a jury has been directed by the judge, but they've enacted the power of the jury, and they've found that they want to throw out the legislation and challenge it, that actually goes down as a perverse verdict. That's the language they use. It's perverse judgment. It's a perverse verdict. I.e., this jury got it wrong. They don't acknowledge it. People who've been through jury trial process, there's endless testimony about people coming out of it. Maybe they went into it reluctantly, because most people go into jury duty reluctantly, but there's endless testimony about people coming out of the other side of it and it having been the most profound experience of their lives, because they found themselves in that situation of judging the justice of the law. Because any government, given the opportunity for 10 minutes, will write legislation that will put it in a position of power from which it cannot be removed. Any government would do that. And if you stand by while the same body that writes legislation has all the power to punish for breaches of that legislation, that is a textbook definition of tyranny. If you stand by while that reality prevails, we write the law and now we say you've broken that law and now you're going to jail for 10 years. That is tyranny. And it's only not tyranny when it's a jury trial, and it can be one person saying innocent, and that's against the 11, and that is the verdict of that jury. It's in that way that the legislation is checked moment by moment in real time by the people to see if it's just. It should make you draw breath. You should go at the significance of that, because the alternative is to let the king or the government write itself into a position from which it cannot be removed. And that's what we're doing. And that's what governments want.
It's exactly. So at the microcosm level, just looking at the system of the courts, is effectively what's happening through global centralisation of power. It's concentration, that decision-making. So irrespective of whether we're looking at legal matters or we're looking at political matters, what we're essentially doing is going into the hands of a monarch. It's a singular decision-maker who gets to determine the future of humanity. And that's effectively kind of the path of global centralisation. Okay, we're a way off from that, but if you take the jury as a micro level, it's about enabling people to have power.
And don't
Historically,
you think,
actually, there's a lot of precedent for juries as well. They had them in ancient Athens, ancient Sparta.
Yeah.
They even had them in different places in Rome. Like, if you look at classical civilizations, they realized, Venice as well.
It's still not a perfect system, as we talked about when we were together.
Not exactly perfect, but it's amazing how many countries you see this in, and suddenly it just seems to have disappeared in most countries that happen.
Something like 100 years before Magna Carta, one of the German emperors, I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, had already written, it was already written into a constitution somewhere that a person would not be, words to the effect of a person would not be stripped of liberty or property without trial by a jury of their peers. It was already there. I mean, Magna Carta didn't come up, by no stretch of the imagination did Magna Carta come up with this. It just reminded a dodgy king, John, he and his mates had been and stealing and taxing and all of the rest of it, and a jury of his peers, which was the barons were his peers, and they were empowered to say, you, hey, sit there while we have a think about what you did. They were simply reminding him of a much older tradition. And don't you think it's amazing the way in which the very idea of being sent the paperwork that says you've been called for jury duty, it's a joke, isn't it? It's like, how am I going to get out of it? Because that's no accident. Because the establishment that wishes that none of these things were real has moved heaven and earth to debase the value of the juries to such an extent that people go, do you know what, can I just not attend? Where it should be, where being on a jury ought to be, hypothetically, it ought to be the high point of somebody's social duty.
The greatest honour.
It should be.
There's a saying that the community level now. So what you're talking about, it's your peers. It's almost like if you live in a small village and you get the opportunity as a group to determine if someone has transgressed upon the founding principles of that town, you get to determine as a group whether that was, if there is a relevant justice. But the level of subsidiarity makes that possible. The more expanded we become as a society, I think it falls down a little. My concern would be, and I would put this to both of you, how would you then handle the tyranny of the majority in a jury situation?
It doesn't work like that.
It wasn't the jury. The jury system is that if one person says not guilty, the guy walks. That's how it doesn't work like that anymore. But that is the principle. That is the enshrined principle, and because it's there specifically to negate the possibility of of the mob.
So that's my point. It doesn't work like that anymore. It should work like that.
It works like that in the States. If you go over to the United States and you start saying, two people can say that you're not guilty, but we'll still stick you in prison, they'd have a riot. This is completely unacceptable over in the States, because they recognise these are our rights, and their constitution comes from our constitution. It's the same thing. They've just codified it. They've just put it all very clearly in one place. And it just seems because our constitution is written across many different documents. Some people say it's unwritten. That's not true. There are bits that are implied. There are bits that are sort of somewhat unspoken, but they're also very clearly delineated.
People would hugely benefit from knowing more about the common law, and then from that that common law is sort of derived from natural law, but the principle of common law is that you can do what you want as long as you don't hurt anyone or do any damage. That's pretty much it. It almost boils down to don't steal. You can't take someone's life, property, wife, freedom, whatever, peace of mind. Don't take from someone. And it's further enshrined in the idea that your rights end where my rights begin. Now, that's it. And all the millions of pages of legislation that now exist are workarounds, because the authorities want to get around the common law that everyone can understand. You can teach a child not to steal. Don't steal. Don't hurt anyone. Don't steal, and don't cause damage. Don't go setting fire to somebody's wheat field, and don't smash their windows. That's it. But all the legislation's there because the authorities want to get around it. It's almost, I mean, I would say it's a bit like, you can quite readily understand the commandments, right? Now, most of the faiths have a version of the same things, and you can say there's 10 or 12 or 8 or whatever, but it all boils down to the same things. The rest of it is workarounds, because the government wants to be able to send its people to kill, and it wants to kill some people, and it wants to take tax, which is property that it's not is. So it's got to write legislation to enable it to get around what we all know, which is don't steal and don't hurt anyone. And okay, but if you're going to have that legislation, the jury has to be there so that moment by moment the people are going, on your bike, you're in a cab. No, you may have written that in the House of Commons and passed it through the upper house, and then it's got the royal assent. But no, take that back and think again, because the people are the ultimate power. The whole idea, I mean, someone was saying in there about, I think it was David talking about, he was talking about the king. Do you want a king? And everyone went, no. A constitutional monarch is actually quite a good idea in principle, because the constitutional monarch is supposed to be there to protect the people, to absolutely protect the freedom of the people. And that ritual that they go through behind the bed sheets in Westminster Abbey and whatever, where he goes from being just, Charles Windsor to being anointed with oil and becoming king. There's a ritual, it's magic. There's a transformation happens that we're not allowed to see, or traditionally weren't allowed to see. But he becomes sovereign in that moment. It makes him the sovereign, which is actually first among equals, right? He's kind of like citizen number one in that moment. But where does his sovereignty come from?
It's contract. It's a treaty between the people and the monarch.
It has come from the people, and you cannot give what you do not own, which means that every single one of us is sovereign. The only way in which, by magical transformation or whatever, we can make the Charles our sovereign is because we're sovereign and we give that to him. That's powerful magic. If you buy into it and you honour it, and if all parties in the system honour it. And so when legislation about anything comes through Commons, Lords, it goes to royal assent, he's supposed to go, I'm not signing that, because that's eroding the freedom of my people. And so Charles is in breach of his coronation oath by being in favour of the Great Reset, straight away, because he's ceding power to whatever, the World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome, whatever. He's not empowered to do that. The moment he does that, he's committed treason. The moment Queen Elizabeth, his mother, signed off on powers to the European Common Market, or the European Commission as it was then, it's treason. You can't do that.
And the weird thing is,
not as the constitutional monarch. You'd have to abdicate. You'd have to step away from that, because you can't be both the constitutional monarch and give away the rights and freedoms of your people. The two things are mutually exclusive.
That's why we, split from the Catholic Church, and we kicked out kings, James II, because he pledged his loyalty to a foreign state. And you find it throughout all of the old oaths. No foreign prince or prelate or state or anything. Okay, they state it about 5 times over, just to make it really, really clear. You cannot give your loyalty to anyone but the people.
Yeah, and King John went crying to the Pope about Magna Carta before the wax had dried on his seal. And the Pope intervened and annulled it. There's no right to do that. The Pope had no jurisdiction. That was a treaty between the king and the people of England. And the Pope had the temerity to say, don't worry about it, John. Consider that deleted. No, you can't do that. I mean, the system falls apart when people don't honour it, in the same way that if you've got a football match underway and somebody picks up the ball and runs with it and throws it in the net, they haven't scored a goal, they've just broken the rules. And if everyone just, okay, right, that's a free-for-all now.
The funny thing is, people think that they're monarchists by saying, I love Charles Windsor or I love Elizabeth. But I don't think they're actually monarchists. They're sort of despotists. They love this. It's a sort of cult of personality. What is what the Greeks called the despot. Whereas myself, I consider myself a monarchist because I don't want our head of state to be some politician. I want it to be a constitutional monarch. But that doesn't mean I have to like the person who occupies the throne. And it doesn't mean that we can't get rid of them if they do commit treason.
That's right. And that's the fun. One of the things that people don't accept is it's salute the rank and not the man. So when a private soldier salutes an officer, he might actually, and be justified in thinking that guy's a but he salutes him because he's not saluting the he's saluting the rank of whatever, lieutenant, right? The two things are separate. And I remember, looking back on it, the first time that I really felt that I didn't understand people was in the aftermath of Diana, Princess of Wales's death. And I thought, wow, God, that's, most famous woman in the world, and she's died in a car crash. That's quite a thing. And a young mum, and she's got young kids. That's a family tragedy. It's got all the makings of, that's a big deal. But that, with men crying in the street, that kind of tearing of clothes and weeping, and then that mass reaction to it, I remember thinking, that's a bit much. Because I don't know that woman, and neither do they. She's Diana, Princess of Wales, and on a human level, it's a tragedy for that family, and it's a big event that has happened. But people wandering about the streets wailing, I thought, I don't get that. I just don't get that. And that was, I remember, I don't know what age I was then. When was that? I was probably in my early 30s. I can't remember. No. Yeah, my late 20s, early 30s, whenever that. And that was the first time I remember thinking, I can't empathise with that.
Well, also that begs another point for me around this whole idea of a constitutional monarch, which raises a concern for me. I've got many concerns about the idea, actually, but one of them is this deification of an individual, which in itself creates a kind of power dynamic that is invisible. And, this conversation for me is really, really illustrated when you talk about where is the root cause? I ask that question of myself all the time. And I wonder, is it the human condition or is it the system that creates the problem? Does the system reinforce the human condition, or does the human condition create the system, or is it just a perpetual cycle?
It's a perpetual cycle, I'd say. I mean, I'm not a Christian. I'm a total atheist. And what I see as having happened is, people becoming very religious to a sort of modern religion with its own hand-washing and mask-wearing rituals. But where I think the Christians are right in a sense is they see a sort of divine spark in everyone. Everyone has a sort of Holy Ghost within them. And everyone has original sin within them. I think fundamentally people have good and evil within them.
For me, I think, again, the whole thing about common law being very simple and actually hard to argue with, unless you've got malevolent intent. Don't kill, don't steal, don't damage folk. Likewise, the message, all that Jesus basically said when he was cornered by the Pharisees and whatever, was love God and love your neighbours as much as you love yourself. That's hard to argue with.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that.
What I mean is that these are very good messages, and especially because he was born and grew up in a world where actually the opposite was being taught. That actually, really, everybody but us, the chosen people, are not to be loved at all. Far from it. And so Jesus emerged in that world and said, "Love your neighbour like you love yourself." And the Pharisees are all going, "Wait, hang on a second. We don't love the neighbours, not at all." And that's why they nailed him to a tree, because he was overturning the law.
Sure, but there's also the problem there. The human itself. Individuals struggle with this idea of self-love. So if you can't even experience a sense of self-love, and you could argue if you do, you analyze the behaviors of people who do commit tyranny and crime, you'll often find a deep-rooted sense of insecurity. So that sense of, love thy neighbor like you love thyself. Well, if you don't experience a deep sense of self and a deep sense of self-love,
that's true.
Well, then good luck treating a neighbor with any
I say the
respect.
people that I say we've created an ecosystem. And I don't really know how we've done it or why we've done it, but we've created an ecosystem that has empowered the most frightened, paranoid people ever born. I mean, these people are terrified at the level of arachnophobia.
Yes.
I mean, they've got an irrational fear of everyone but them
and everything.
And I think Derek invoked Malthusianism. That's the whole Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb and Gerard Harding and the tragedy of the commons. All of these various ways of making everyone else the problem. Billions of people are the problem, and we're going to have to find a way to get rid of most of them. That manifests itself again and again and again. And Malthusianism was not the first iteration of it, but the eugenicists are cut from the same bowl, and we're being governed by people, faceless, unaccountable, unelected people that are terrified of people, and they want rid. They just want rid.
But on that point, it feels like a cycle again. We've seen that countless times in history,
Because-
but
well-
it does. We do come out of those cycles, and they.
We do. Anacyclosis, Polybius, and all of that. But you've also got where never before has there been the state capacity. Henry VIII might have wanted to be a despot, a Roman emperor, but they didn't have this. They didn't have the reach. But somebody in Britannia wouldn't have known who the emperor
right.
was. Neither did he need
That's
to
the
know
point
that.
of difference.
Look at the
Yeah.
tax rates. Tax rates in medieval times was something like a 1/12 of your income. You paid one
A tithe.
one month of the year.
Uh-huh.
Now, people are realistically paying like half of their income.
Well, that is money with menaces. Britain might as well be being run by something worse than the Cray twins. It's extraction of money with menaces. Give us more than half of everything you earn, or we'll put you in jail. Like what?
It's crazy. Well, on that though, so again, you talk about the idea of people revolting and not paying tax. I honestly believe if enough people didn't pay their taxes, it wouldn't take long for chaos to reign, because people wouldn't know how to replace the things they've got comfortable with. Cleaning the streets, making sure the roads are functional.
But your tax doesn't pay for that anyway.
Right, it pays for a whole load of junk, but at least a portion of that goes to some of the public good.
I don't know that it does. I think any money that the state uses now,
Well,
in a practical sense,
you're
is just
probably
money
right.
they've created out of nowhere.
Possibly.
Your tax is just collected so that you don't
But
have it.
Well, you're right, but I'm not directly paying the people to collect my rubbish at the end of the street. I'm not directly paying that. That's going through a government mechanism. My fear with anything like that is that unless we gather in crowds like this and actually start to develop the sense of self-sovereignty without having to delegate that sovereignty to another supposed sovereign individual, then we will never have a society that can be truly self-organizing or self-governing.
You said to me when I interviewed you in the week there something that one of the many things that registered with me when you said, while I respect that some people want to go and live communally and whatever, I want to live pretty much as I do now, with in contact with like-minded people. But I don't want to surrender all of this, and I get that completely. I mean, I want to be able to live my life, but I don't. Now that I've realised that I'm in thrall to these corrupted institutions everywhere you look, banks, government, education, and all of the rest of it. I just want to be able to replicate what I already do without having to be touched by them.
Yes.
I don't want their filthy paws anywhere near me.
Well, people said during COVID it was like the government has walked into their household.
Which
they
they
walked in
did.
the door and they weren't invited. And they didn't just walk through the door, they barged it down.
I don't believe in revolution. I think revolutions are always just disastrous for the people. You end up with millions of people dead. History has shown. I think it's my good friend Ralph Schulhammer, he talks about a renaissance or a regeneration, or a reformation. Lots of words, but not the revolution word. I think I wouldn't go there, but we need a renaissance. We need to, there's another great word which is rehabilitate, which actually etymologically means to reinvest with dignity. Now that's a beautiful concept. To rehabilitate a prisoner means to reinvest with dignity. Now, you can get your head around that, can't you? When you think about taking somebody from whatever degraded circumstances they've ended up in by accident or design, and you reinvest them with dignity. And the society needs to be reinvested with dignity, because people are dignified creatures. Given the circumstances, they will live with dignity. They want to live with dignity, they will.
Yes. The counter-argument to that, I suppose, is in a way that if you look at it from the recovery perspective as well, for those who've gone through addiction, is that the first step is to admit you have a problem, to embrace rehabilitation. As we talked about this discussion began, how many people actually have confronted the reality that we do have a major problem?
I was thinking about that. I nearly said it today when I stood up on the stage, but I don't know, I got distracted and I said something else instead. But it's generally understood that if the entire human population of planet Earth got their heads shaved on the same day, head lice would become extinct, never to reoccur. That's all it would take. And I was thinking, if everyone on the planet threw their smartphone in the bin on the same day, the door of the digital cage would just and swing open. But people understandably have become addicted to convenience. That's the addiction. They're addicted to convenience. And people are going to have to embrace inconvenience. That is unfortunately the truth. There's so many factors. People have been sold happiness, like you want to be happy all the time. But that's like being drunk all the time. A little bit of drunk now and again is fine, but most of the time you've got to be sober. And so sadness gets a bad rap. But anyone will tell you, anyone that tries to create will tell you that a lot of their best ideas and their best work comes out of a place of strife.
Well, it does.
One sort or another.
Pain is a signal in your body that something is wrong. You know, so we need that.
So there's a whole miseducation has gone on where people are told, if you're not happy 24 hours a day and constantly upgrading your phone and buying another BMW or a Land Rover, you're unhappy. It's absolute nonsense, but we're all addicted to that. But as you say, the 12-step program says, admit you've got a problem. Actually, well, the 12-step program actually says next, look to a higher power. You know, it is. It's a very Christian God. It started in the 30s by a couple of Americans in Ohio or something. And then the third one is basically gather around you a group of people that have already come to the same realization, and you can support each other. That's the three key ones. You've got a problem. You're going to have to worship something other than the booze, so make it God or make it family or make it community, but find something that's not you, something transcendent, and then surround yourself with people that think, yeah, I used to do that too, I can help you.
Or maybe make it natural law and freedom.
It's a huge task. I mean, we're talking in hypotheticals here, but that, unfortunately, it's been centuries in the undoing. We've had 300 years of science, which has manifested itself ultimately in people becoming materialists, and we're not even good materialists, because if we were materialists, we would worship material, but we don't. We just take things out of the ground, leave a hell of a mess, turn it into paper and plastic, and then when we're finished with it after 18 months, we throw it in landfill. So we're not even materialists. It's emptier than that. We've come to the end of everything that's possible after 300 years of so-called enlightenment and reason, and and there is no God. Now here we are.
And I think that's where we are in this transitionary. I think it is a precipice of a new set of ideas, and I think that it's the ideas that dominate society. You know, Plato said, "Those who tell the stories rule society." That is the point of difference. You recognise that is the reach that, the tyrants of old didn't have the kind of reach of today. So it's the information landscape is so important. We need to retain freedom of information, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, because without that, new ideas can't permeate. And having been in the building at the UN last week, it was very clear, it was ironclad, there was a desire to constrain and control information so that their view of the world cannot be tainted. It's, the World Economic Forum sat and said the number one problem facing humanity is misinformation. Now, that is an organization who has got used to shaping and molding how we see the society. So that the moment that comes under threat, and it quite clearly is for them, they call that misinformation. Malinformation. So our ability to navigate that information. The most critical thing for me, I believe, to evolve from here is exactly this. We're at that point of renaissance. I like that term as well. We need a new set of ideas. And I believe they are emerging. I think they are emerging.
So do I.
Have we lost our old set of ideas?
Reclaiming old ideas is also part of it, actually. Because, again, people talk about what we've lost in, say, indigenous cultures. We're looking through a lens of ancient history, and I agree, there is lots of things through history that we must reclaim. Part of the Renaissance is a reclamation of some of the things we've lost, but we can't take our eye off the ball, because that's also happening in the present. Eroding free speech is a long-fought right and freedom that will eventually be a distant past that we're trying to reclaim once again. So that is an example of things, we're losing things in real time that we've got to defend now. But I do agree, we have to look back and say, hey, we've made similar mistakes. Why haven't we restored those principles? So I think the new old, and I haven't thought of a phrase, but it's like the new old. It's a way to embrace something that's emergent whilst simultaneously protecting right now what is fundamental, but also looking back to what has been lost to say, what can we restore? And I think there is an amalgamation. There's always an integral idea that can formulate in the space of the past, the present, and the future that can perhaps guide us. And there's this idea of, postmodernism that we're in right now. There's this metamorphosis that's taking kind of the best of rationality and something that's emerged since post-Enlightenment phase and kind of recourse correcting by actually, it's almost like a magnetic pull towards some of those things that have been lost because we've gone too far in that direction. But then what's beyond that? How do we even inject new ideas? How do we, in this modern world, draw upon ancient wisdom in order to navigate this? And as we were talking about this whole world of judiciary and justice, I was thinking, well, frankly, the internet, the digital world, is a parallel world in many ways. And it's almost in a state of lawlessness in a way. So I can understand the pull towards governance, yet I simultaneously reject the idea of a centralized form of governance. But if you were to put into practice some of the things we've been talking about here, let's say if you go to a pub and Neil's a very well-spoken and well-behaved guy, but you put a Scotch whiskey in some people, they might behave differently. But in a pub environment, without even intervention of a legal system, okay, the landlord might intervene. They're the sovereign in that space. But before that, some of the peers may say, well, hang on, mate, you've had enough. You've got to go home. On the internet, if someone supposedly takes the same behavioral trait and just starts being vicious and attacking someone, there is no equivalent of the boys or the crowd coming around saying, hang on, mate, slow down there a little bit. You've had enough. Step out for a minute, will you? There's none of that. So the place to experiment with a lot of these ideas of the judiciary is in the digital realm. And I've heard some fascinating podcasts recently where they're actually looking at that. So in the context of speech, or this idea of hate speech or wrong speech, there is speech that is genuinely harmful. If I started plainly insulting you, Neil, one of these boys would say, hang on a minute, Dan, have you lost your marbles?
Yes, but it is only words.
It is only, I know it's only, and so much for sticks and stones may break my bones, but words never hurt me, but it is only words, you're right. But if we are going to look at what is the appropriate behaviour, not harming one another.
To cut to the chase in a way, I think, for me, it comes down to money. The freedom to transact. Mm-hmm. I mean, I sometimes think that the freedom to transact actually trumps freedom of speech. Because if you can't buy a ticket to get to the theatre, what you were going to say when you got to the theatre is redundant. You need to be able to transact. I don't think we're there yet. Some application of blockchain and and the Satoshi protocol as it was, but has been corrupted since. But something there that's peer-to-peer that cannot be subverted and controlled by the centralists, from that acorn, the mighty oak tree of everything else will grow.
Yes.
It's the creation and control of the flow of money that empowers all of the wrong. And if and when that's taken from them, and it can be taken from them by the perfect application of blockchain, then everything else will happen organically and naturally, I think.
Well, that's
you
why
say that. You say that, but what they can do is they can come in and start geo-blocking. So they can start blocking websites out of countries. Then you get VPN, but then most people aren't using the VPN. Then they can stop it in the app stores. Then what they can do is they can say any phone that wants to be used in this country, we're going to put a little piece of software on it
well, they can.
to make it even more.
That's Web 2 though. Web 3. I mean, we heard about it today in the room. The technologies are emerging that will defy that.
But look at library. Have you heard about library?
Well, I mean, you're right. Again, I'm saying that to me, hypothetically, that's the solution. If that Gordian knot of how do we stop them creating and controlling the flow of money, then that's the solution. Everything else will come from that.
Well, I agree with that. So it's the immutable nature of that makes it powerful, but that's why it's feared. But also everything we've just talked about now. So you can have the most powerful technology that cannot be controlled by a centralized authority, that is completely immutable, completely disrupted. You cannot disrupt it. However, theoretically, it's perfect in that way, or certainly a degree of magnitude more effective than what we have now. But nonetheless, people's human behavior, the herd behavior, the moment you take what I call the above the ground law, you take a lawmaker, all the problems we've just illustrated, as soon as you give someone the perception that they're doing the wrong thing by transacting using this thing that they cannot actually stop, people will stop using it. It still requires that leap of faith and courage to say, enough's enough. And there are people in this room doing that. There are people doing that. Tomorrow we're going to hear from someone from Ecuador, and there's entire communities who are completely transacting outside of the government's watchful eye. It's possible, but the moment you interject what I call a traditional or above the ground law or a perception that you're doing, and we've seen the power of perception in the last few years. So theoretically, the system can subvert the system, but the reality is human beings are pack animals and they're completely afraid of challenging authority. So until we can actually get to that point where we accept that we have a problem, and enough people do so and are willing to confront that bitter reality, then, we've got to keep getting together in places like that and spreading those ideas until they catch.
I think what is a big step along the way is the fact that we have identified what the solutions ought to be.
Or could be, yeah.
We don't have the tech or perhaps even the wisdom properly to manifest the solutions. But if you don't have a focused target that you're aiming at, you're not going to hit it.
Yes.
We do at least know the elusive hind running through the forest that we need to target.
Agree. And I also think the solutions are becoming distributed and decentralized in nature.
Yeah.
There is the proclivity to move to one way to do something. The amount of times I've heard in the last few years, if we all just did this, if we all just
Not
stopped paying
only,
our
but
taxes,
also.
all of it.
It's got legs, that. It's got legs, that philosophy, I'm telling you.
Legs. Because that way, lots of people, it's like nature. Watch how nature operates. The scattering of the seeds. Some will grow, some won't. Some will grow faster than others, some will grow stronger than others.
Yeah, well, one of Darwin's great Damascene moments when he was in the process of putting together what eventually became, the evolution, the theory of evolution. He went to Australia and he saw the platypus, right? And he realised it was filling the same niche as the water ratty from Wind in the Willows in an English river. And he thought, why would a God, solve the same problem two different ways? But I think you want to put that on its head in a way and go, well, why not solve the same problem in two different ways? If the double bubble is that you end up with two creatures as fascinating as the platypus and the water rat instead of just one, it's better. It makes the world a more interesting place. The same niche being occupied effectively by two profoundly different manifestations. Yes. That's better.
Yes. In my past life, in the corporate world, I worked with a major company, and their project was to create the one best way. So they embarked on this project to find out and they're in almost every country in the world. They sent this entire team out to go and figure out the one way. If we just go and learn from every country, what's the one way? The biggest thing they learned, there is no one way.
Yeah,
because
they're not embracing complexity.
Exactly. There was some commonality, sure. And there was things, actually, I can't believe you're doing that over there. That's really smart. We'll do some of that, but we'll adapt it to our environment. The adaptive nature, that's for me is the local decentralized alternative rather than this one size fits all, homogenous, unique. Let's all think the same way, breathe the same way.
Well, it's the free market, and that's the beauty of the free market. I wanted to ask whether you guys read any economists like Mises or Hopper or Rothbard.
It's not really my specialty, I have to confess.
I mean, at the moment, I consume information at a speed of knots, and I confess I've fallen into a trap of all-you-can-eat type buffet consumption of information, whereas I don't sit down and go and have a distinct meal of a Mises and read the entire text. I will take a piece of that. I'll go for a piece of that. But what the benefit of doing that for me is and I continue to do this at the moment, is it gives me a flavour of lots of different ideas that create a really rich palette. But it leads to a curiosity. If I was to use that food example, I really like spicy food, so I will tend to go and eat a lovely curry. So if I find a philosophy that really strikes my attention, I will then want to go and have every meal within that philosophy. So I'm in that curious exploration of ideas, but I'm taking lots of snippets, and I think that's probably one of the benefits and drawbacks of the modern world is that, again, AI is a big discussion, but I can draw from hundreds of sources in the space of minutes to get rich perspectives on lots of different things. I can stress test them, but I do think it is important to start to go deep. I call it like a T-shaped kind of knowledge accumulation. You go for this horizontal plane where you're taking lots of different information, but then you can go deep on a field, and it gives you that depth, because you can read the synopsis of a book and think that sounds like a story I would like, but it's not until you read the full story that you get the depth of the character. So I will confess my consumption of knowledge over the last few years has given me a rich range of perspectives, but I lack the depth, which I'm now excited about. And coming to events like this as well, it is still that taster session, but you're like, oh, I like that idea, or I want to go deeper on that. But that's, again, I think that's, if I think about creativity, that's almost how creativity begins. It starts in chaos. The chaos precedes the kind of order that comes from the net depth. And I would almost encourage people to go along that journey of exploration, and they find that, Mises, I'll look into Mises, what's that? And you start to then find these new ideas that can start to form the new things we've been discussing, but then the depth must eventually come.
Yeah, I do think people need to dig down a little bit, because
I agree.
It just sort of amazes me how people ignore economics and they sort of treat it as something dull. And I just sat in the chair where you were earlier, was a chap, and we started out talking about Big Pharma, and we just ended up going through just everything in economics, Mises, Rothbard, Walter Block, and it's all about incentives. Where are the incentives placed? What are people going to do in any scenario? I think that's one of the most important questions when you talk about what you want to do with the system.
Well, it's carrot and stick, isn't it? People will fall in line with the carrot or the stick. And, who gets to determine what is the carrot and what is the stick, and then, therefore, who determines the behaviours? Behaviours are largely driven by those incentives, but also the threat of consequence. I think both of those are very valid means of affecting human behaviour that is well studied. So how do we address the economic who's creating the economic incentives and the weight behind them, and how do we address who's creating this the consequences? To me, this wraps everything up into a very neat seed of an idea. But also when we look at economics, we look at how economics is captured. If you haven't spoken to Richard Werner, look at the origin of some of the economic textbooks. And again, it was the powerful who determined something. I'm not talking about the Mises of the world. I'm talking about some of the more other traditional. I studied economics at university, and
you studied Keynes.
Exactly. So you start to
wasn't an economist.
No, that's right. So they come from industry. A lot of these people, and again, it's creating incentive. Even the economic textbooks were created by those who wanted to benefit from them. To create models of thought. So. It comes right back to, for me, how do we start to create new ideas? How do we build on the old? And how do we then use that to create a path forward? I'm going to have to say goodnight, gentlemen, because my presence is required down on the dance floor.
That's okay. Well,
thank you, gentlemen.
Well, thank you. Thank you,
Neil.
Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like, a share, a subscribe, hit the notification button if you would like to help. We've got a Patreon and a Subscribe Star, so please head on over there and pledge us some support if you want to keep this journalism going. We've got a professional studio here and we could do with your support. Finally, consider coming down to our upcoming Resistance GB Live. You can meet the guests, you can engage. We've got Kate Chemarani supported by fantastic freedom band Whom by Fire. It's Thursday, 31st of October, down at Finsbury Park's a Night Owl. Doors open 5:30. We'll see you there.